Hi, I'm Aoife from womenshealthdublin.ie. I'm a mum, I'm a girl or a lady, and I'm a women's health physio or a pelvic health physio. And in this video, I want to talk about pelvic health through a woman's lifetime. So starting with their early years right through to after menopause. I could talk for hours and I love talking, but I'm going to try and keep it short and sweet so that you can hold your attention. But if you want to ask me more in-depth questions, please reach out. But there are topics I won't cover that you're maybe waiting to hear. But again, I just don't have all the time in the world. So I hope I cover the most common things. And maybe you won't agree with some of the things I say because a lot of this is my own opinion. So we're not talking about evidence-based research here, just my opinion about pelvic health through a woman's life. So starting with the early years, some girls can have issues with bedwetting and, anxiety related, overactive bladder, so needing the toilet a lot in kind of stressful situations. And then, of course, we start to the period stage, and that can be for anyone like under 10 or in the early teenage years. And then some girls don't get their period till the late teenage years. I think that can be really stressful for girls when they're waiting and all their friends have it. If only they knew, they'd be like delighted. But peer pressure and all that, of course. And your period during your teenage years can be, some of the most painful periods. And this is really common. During the teenage years and early 20s can often be the most painful of all. So some girls do end up going on the pill for acne or for just painful periods or irregular periods, or their periods are going on much longer than the normal 5 to 7 day bleed. And that's usually just their hormones kind of trying to get in sync in those earlier years. So it's questionable whether they should be put on contraceptive for those reasons or not. That's a debate for another day. And obviously then we can get to the losing their virginity stage. So in schools, they might teach things like very brief sex education. And I'm going to talk about that later, about what I think is appropriate for each age group and what we should be teaching women and girls about their pelvic health. And then commonly we kind of come into the early 20s where the most common thing we'll see is vaginismus or dyspareunia, which is kind of pain during sex or attempting to have sex. And a lot of that can be emotional or anxiety, being with a sexual partner you're not relaxed with or feeling pressure, or maybe some girls have had some sexual abuse in their past. So it's really very common to see women in clinic with high tone pelvic floor or non-relaxing pelvic floor, or really sensitive in their vagina or in their vulva, that's really sensitive to the touch. So that's a common thing we see. Overactive bladder is something we see in through all walks of life, and some people have that habit from when they're a young girl, maybe wetting the bed or just going to the toilet many, many times in a day, in nervous situations, interviews, a new school. So that's something we see at all stages of life, and it's a common thing we treat. And then, of course, we get to maybe fertility. So trying to conceive a baby, and some women struggle, some women find it really easy, but it might be the first time that women are like, oh, I have a cycle, I'm supposed to know what happens on which days, and oh, I only ovulate on certain days. So sometimes it's only when we're actually seeking to conceive a child that we look into what our menstrual cycle is. I think that's really common. And then women get pregnant. And obviously pregnancy, there's a multitude of layers of pregnancy: hormones, pelvic floor, certain illnesses, gestational diabetes, there's so many things that come with pregnancy, insomnia, swelling. So a lot of women get shocked when they get pregnant. They're absolutely delighted. And then they feel like, I didn't know about any of these things that happen when I'm pregnant, or when the baby's born and delivered, the changes that happen in my body, or the injury that can happen in childbirth, and sometimes dysfunctions they're left with afterwards, like leakage or pain. So, they do sometimes feel like, gosh, why did no one tell me about this until I got pregnant or until I had the baby? I'm going to come back to that later too. And then after our kind of reproductive years, as we call them. So you have a few children, and I suppose the shock of pregnancy is less and less, and the changes in your body do become less, or we try to get used to the new you and how you feel like a different person. And maybe you realize you can't go back to the way you were in your 20s, just like your skin will not go back to the way it was in its 20s. And then in our kind of early 40s, and again, for some women earlier in their 30s, or if they've had certain surgeries or have had illnesses, they can reach menopause much younger in life. But perimenopause can go on for, up to 10 years. And menopause is really only you reach it when you haven't had a period for a full 12 months. So perimenopause can be this huge chunk of our life. And like we think our pregnancy, is that 9 months when you're all consumed in pregnancy and how you feel. And I think most of us realize once the baby's born, you very quickly forget about pregnancy. And that's why we do it repeatedly. And that's why we're willing to go back again and again. Because we forget very quickly about the discomfort we experienced and this discomfort of labor as time goes on, obviously. But when you're in it, you're living it. I think perimenopause, though, can go on for so long. And I'm not going to list all the symptoms, but insomnia, anxiety, hot flushes, brain fog, feeling like you can't socialize with your pals, dryness in your vagina, painful sex, low libido. The list is huge. Headaches, really, there's a huge impact on our lives. And I do find when I post things on my Instagram about perimenopause and menopause, a lot of people switch off. I can see on my stories that people just don't want to hear it. And, that's all ahead of us for all of us that are watching this now. And we will go through menopause and we will come out the other side. And, there is, a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So there is life after menopause. But in the build-up, some people will feel little or no change in them, and then others, up to 50%, will get a lot of symptoms. So I think it's really important we know what those symptoms are, we know what to look out for, and we know who to go to for help. So a physio like me, a specialist GP, there are doctors out there that specialize in menopause, and where should we be going? So that kind of leads me on to education. And I put up a survey this week on my Instagram, and over 90% of you in all of them said we should be teaching teenage girls all about these subjects, that none of you knew about it. And then when you became pregnant, you're only learning from somebody like me, or in your classes in the hospital, or by talking to other mums. And I kind of agree with you all that we really should be better educated. But what I'm not sure about is at what stages of life. So I'm trying to think back to when I was a teenager, not that long ago. And would my 16-year-old self want to learn about menopause, or perimenopause, or postpartum symptoms after you have a baby, or labor, or all the symptoms you can get when you're pregnant? I don't know. Would anyone have babies, or would we just scare all our teenage girls? Maybe that's a good thing. If you don't want them, going down that path or having kids early, each to their own. But I just wonder, would our teenagers really take this on board? And should we be teaching them age-appropriate lessons? And a lot of you said we really need to teach the boys too, and I agree. And look, I went to a convent where there was only girls, so we weren't going to be teaching side by side. But I think in sex education for boys, there should be some information about what girls go through, or how many days of the month they can get pregnant, some information. But I think we really need to look at what kind of information we give them and what wording we use. And not to sound really old, but try and keep it age appropriate, try and keep it cool, try and keep it fun, try and get it into their heads, because if we just go in there and bark at them or use lots of scientific words or medical words, they'll all just get embarrassed, close off their ears and forget all about it. So I really think teenage girls should be learning about their menstrual cycle, tracking their cycle, using an app on their phone, knowing what's normal, knowing if they've got really, really bad painful periods, that maybe they shouldn't just go on the pill and that solves everything. Teaching them a little bit about signs of endometriosis, signs of PCOS, teaching them a little bit about fertility, saying, look, you might decide you want to get pregnant when you're 23 or 33 and it might not happen. teaching them about what the morning after pill is and when it's appropriate, and that it delays ovulation, but you don't just take it every time you have unprotected sex. Teaching them about contraception, the different forms of contraception, and teach them about when, if they do have painful sex, or that sex can be sore the first few times you have it, like getting into the practical nitty gritty of what they need to know, how to use a tampon, using sanitary towels, using the period pants, so like, I do think we should be in there teaching them about pelvic health and a little bit about pregnancy and a little bit about menopause. The reason I think we should teach them about menopause is because most likely their mum is going through it at that time and they have no idea. So they're a hormonal mess and they don't realise it. And, they're up and down roller coaster of hormones and they don't know why they feel like that, and it's hormones. And it's only when you go through that phase you look back and go, oh yeah, that was me. But at the time you do not want to be told that. It's like your husband telling you to relax when you're really stressed. It doesn't go down well. So we have to put ourselves in those shoes and think, what would I want to learn, and would I take it in, and would I just cringe and close my ears? So again, the age appropriateness of it and how much the boys need to know. I don't want to scare girls about pregnancy. Like, when you get pregnant, you're absolutely delighted. And then as the pregnancy goes on, you can get a bit fearful about delivery. You have all these symptoms you weren't expecting. And then women say to me, why did no one tell me this? But my answer is, we'll tell you when you need to know, like, let's inform you without scaring you. Let's empower you to make decisions. But should I tell someone the year they get pregnant all the possible things that could happen to them in pregnancy to make them uncomfortable? Like, is that going to put them off? Is that going to freak them out or make them anxious? So it's a really fine line. So some of you might say, yeah, I want to know everything. But lots of times it's on a need to know basis. You might sail through pregnancy without an issue, and then you don't want to hear of all these possible issues that could have arisen and they didn't. And the same with delivery or childbirth. It's such a spectrum of what can happen and we just don't know. And even if you have 4 kids, each delivery can be totally different, and each experience. And I say this all the time, but life is about experience. So if you've experienced childbirth, it's kind of less scary and more scary the next time because you know what to expect. But you got through it. It was just a couple of days in your life, and the baby was worth it. And the changes that happen in your body on the first time can be so shocking. But I think as time goes on, you accept them, and then you have another baby and another baby, and you just realize the love a mum has for their babies is worth all those changes. Like, we would love to be the same body that we were when we were 20. But we know we can't. And as time goes on, I hope that women accept that more and realize they're a new person and they're a mum and they don't even have time to look in the mirror now. So there's a lot of other challenges. Can't have time to get to the gym, and we don't, puke all over us, and sleepless nights and all of that. And then we get through that, I hope, because I'm not through yet, but I hope. And then we go through to the perimenopause stage of life, and we have small kids or teenage kids, and we're still a mum and we're still really busy, and things change. And I think that's where the education needs to be pushed. I actually think there's a lot of pregnancy education out there, and there's a lot of people on Instagram like me or other, yoga teachers and doulas that really support women in pregnancy and antenatal classes. In fact, it's often the postpartum that no one warns them about. Those first few weeks after you've had the baby, what's normal, how much blood should there be, what should my stitches be like? I feel like that's where there's a lacking of education. And then, the months ahead of you where you are sleep deprived and postnatal depletion, which I have done a video about before. So, I do think we're focusing more on the pregnancy and postpartum, but there's a huge surge and a wave in the perimenopause phase. And there's a lot more traction out there and discussion out there, and I think there needs to be. And I think that women who have come through pregnancy or, have had their first or second child should be opening up their eyes to the next phase. And it might be 10 years away or it might be 5 years away, but we need to be looking out for the symptoms. And I've posted lists of symptoms before, but I do get the feeling that my listeners or my viewers, followers, whatever you want to call them, don't want to hear about it. And I suppose it's negative. But if we know about it, if we know what to expect, we can combat it. And there's loads of holistic approaches. And there's also a totally different view on HRT or hormones to take that were not there years ago. And seeing a doctor that specializes in this and getting treatment is really, really important. So I think at all phases, we need to educate ourselves, but it might just be appropriate to the stage in your life. And my opinion is that we should be learning about each stage just before we go into it. So learn about pregnancy when you're trying to conceive. Learn about postpartum when you're pregnant. Learn about perimenopause when you've had a couple of kids and it's the next stage. Learn about your menstrual cycle, fertility, endometriosis, PCOS. Learn about what's normal in a woman before you try and conceive in your teenage years. And definitely a little bit of education about pregnancy and menopause, just to let those girls know this is what happens, this is what's normal per se, this is what your mum might be going through, so will you give her a break? You're not the only one in the house. I wish someone had told me that. But let's not overwhelm them with huge amount of information, and let's just keep lots of women's health advocacy groups out there and people like me, healthcare professionals that are giving you the correct data, evidence-based information, nutritionists, yoga teachers, coming at it from a holistic point of view. Let there be the information easily accessible and the right information, but I do think it's sometimes up to the woman just to look for it a little bit when it's appropriate to her. So that's my view on it all. That was really quick, much longer than I was supposed to be, but I could talk on this for hours. So if anyone ever wants to invite me somewhere to ask me to talk on this, I would. I hope that was helpful. I'm Aoife from womenshealthdublin.ie.